a forgotten history behind a commonly used Chinese medicine. A true ancestor of the king of flowers, yet to be discovered. From simplicity to myriad complexity, it's all in the breeding. The unveiling of a legendary mystery that surrounds the people's flower. Dawn stirs in the valley as its inhabitants come to life. Though the Chinese New Year has just passed, the valley retains some of the New Year atmosphere. One man rises especially early and prepares to leave home. Li Xinren is 50 years old. It's time for him to go to Fu Nu Mountain to look for a wild peony. It's his first commission of the year. Fu Nu Mountain is in the Tongling Range. It's a crucial habitat for wild peonies. Using just his bare hands and carrying simple farm tools, Li scales the steep cliff. His extraordinary climbing skills have been passed down from his ancestors. Having lived on the mountain for years, he's familiar with all the plants here. But finding a wild peony is no easy task. This is his first night spent in the wild this year. There will be many more. This has been the life of the plant hunters for centuries. Today, there are around 1,300 varieties of peony, but the flower's origin has always been a mystery. In the 1970s, researchers found that the world had a total of 9 species of wild tree peony. All can be found on the slopes at least 1,500 meters above sea level in the Tongling Mountains. These wild peonies still have the look of the original flowers. The purple spot and the Yangshan peony are the 2 most widely distributed wild peonies in China. Their plain looks are in marked contrast to the modern cultivars. It's in their ancient genes that resides the root of all the peonies that we see today. How has the peony evolved into its current form? The historical records tell us rather little. The story of the peony begins deep in the mountains. Wild peonies are usually found scattered in sparse, remote areas. Mr. Lee's 10-day peony hunt finally pays off. It's a moment of joy and excitement. His ancestors must have felt just the same when they made their finds.
起码都得有20年才能长进出。这它干了以后又生点新籽，完生点新籽，总是起码我感觉着差不多有十来年，有10来年时间能长这个真穗长这么高。
In carefully digging around the roots of this goddess of the soil, Lee relies on the generations of wisdom learnt from his forebears to ensure the plant's survival. Lee's client is a horticulturist called Wang Hongbin. Wang Hongbin hopes that this peony plant will enable him to breed a new variety. Although modern science has mastered grafting techniques, ensuring the wild plants can survive in a domesticated environment still requires careful work.
这个牡丹生长的海拔都是2000多，现在都是走在那1500，再生存适应，再到这个800、900，再到这300、400。 逐渐进入平原地区。
In fact, Wang Hongbin will have to wait at least 10 years to see a new variety from this wild peony. As the wild peony comes down from the mountain, it opens up a mysterious historical path. This is the process by which the cultivated varieties evolved from the wild in the first place. Current research shows that the peony has 3 times as many genes as a human being. It's hard to imagine how many experiments and iterations were tried before the horticulturists of old finally found success. It has been a long road indeed that has led the peony, being crowned the king of flowers. Tongling City in Anhui Province is 800 kilometers from Luoyang. It's on the southern edge of the wild peonies range in China. There is just one type of wild peony that flourishes here, the Yangshan peony. In April, simple-looking white flowers appear all over the landscape. Deep in the mountains, there are few to enjoy the scene. The local farmers bide their time, waiting for another moment in the peony's life cycle. In late summer, there's a lot of activity underground. Burrowing grubs fatten themselves on plant roots for their winter reserve. It's a signal that harvest time is near. The nutrition in the leaves flows down to be stored in the roots. In September, Mr. Sao and his fellow farmers get busy. Hopes for a good harvest are high. Above ground, the plants have withered. But what these farmers want are the roots. The peony has a complex root system. To avoid damage to the roots, the farmers use a traditional tool, specially designed for the task, the double-toothed hoe. The freshly dug roots are reddish in color, another rare feature that distinguishes the peony from the rest of the plant world. The soil in Tongling is ideal for peony root cultivation. The area has been a center for the production of medicinal peony root for many centuries. The farmers stick to their traditional hand processing methods, rejecting automation. After peeling off the small tendrils and pulling out the core, they get what they need, the root bark. Processed peony root bark has almost magical medicinal properties. It's one of the most common ingredients in Chinese medicines, and one of the key ingredients in the famous Lu Wei Di Huang pills, which are made with 6 types of Chinese herbs. The recipe for these pills first originated in the Eastern Han Dynasty around 2,000 years ago, and was refined in the Song Dynasty 1,000 years later. The peony was treasured for its medicinal value long before it was appreciated for its beauty. In Chinese medicine, the peony is said to clear heat, ease the vital organs, and promote circulation of the blood. Along with 252 other kinds of medicinal plant, the peony is listed in China's Shan Nong's Herbal Classic, the first classic work on plants and their uses, compiled in the 3rd century AD. In Tongling, people still use their peony root bark to make medicinal liquor according to the ancient methods. It's used to relieve rheumatic pain. The farmers are living in a manner shared by generations of their ancestors. Their vast fields of peonies mean everything to the people of Tongling. The baskets they're carrying are full of the joy of the harvest.
这几年呢， 价格最好的就是卖上1600、1700吧。
价格这是1300的，
怎么这么巧？能加一点，再加一点。
这加不起来，加不起来，加我们弄不到钱嘛。
你看我这个，我们家的生活就靠这个蛋皮。小孩读书的时候，也就是蛋皮卖9钱嘛。蛋皮钱没有出来，下半年开学的时候还问人家借一点，以后把蛋皮卖掉了再还给人家。
钱不一样嘛，一棵树嘛。
明白。啊。
The market draws to a close as the last deals are struck. Tongling has lived with and by the peony for centuries. It may not be a cure for all their ills, but they would certainly be worse off without it. The value of the peony was discovered and explored in ancient times and has since featured consistently in all the subsequent catalogs of medicinal herbs. By late autumn, the farmers are preparing their fields for next year's crop and planting out the rootstock that will provide their next harvest. It's only the plain and simple varieties, those close to the wild species, that can be used for medicine. The complex breeding of the spectacular multi-petal varieties has seen them lose the magical chemistry that would make them effective. But man does not live by medicine alone. The Luoyang Museum has a collection of ancient artifacts, some up to 3,000 years old. In a time when a normal lifespan was rarely beyond 40, men revered a world that was beyond their understanding. They worshipped gods and feared ghosts. As technical and craft skills developed, the decorative features of ritual objects began to reflect naturalistic designs in greater detail and accuracy. The peony soon grafted its way into the scene. The giant Buddha at the heart of Luoyang's Longmun grottos bears the facial features of its sponsor, Empress Wu Zetian, the only woman to rule China in her own name. Though she briefly pushed aside her husband's Tang dynasty, it was nonetheless an era of peace and prosperity. It is said, if the Buddha loses its smile, the lives of the peony growers will change forever. This is Linxia Hui Autonomous Prefecture of Gansu Province. "46-year-old Zhao Yingsai is about to start work restoring a masterpiece created by his ancestors. He's been preparing for this day for 30 years. The Yubaba Shrine was built in the Tang Dynasty. Originally, it was just the tomb of an important Muslim dignitary. Now it has become the symbol of the whole of Linxia Prefecture. The shrine is decorated with carved brickwork in peony patterns. Zhao is a professional brick carver. He is a devout craftsman who believes that the delicate peonies on the bricks originated from the Tang Dynasty. It's extremely difficult to make carved bricks. The slightest mistake will destroy all the craftsman's efforts. Zhao is currently making bricks for a shrine built in the early 18th century. His carvings will eventually cover all the walls, turning the shrine into a new object of civic pride. Combining old and new brickwork, Zhao is building a complete screen wall in the shrine, which is both beautiful and unique. The brickwork tableau is first assembled on the ground to check its components, and then mounted on the wall with great care, piece by piece. The decorative screen rests on the wall as firmly as the present rests on the past. The beauty of the peony, held fast in stone, will stand for years unwilting, as firm as the craftsman's faith in his Tang Dynasty craft.
Our past shapes who we are today, even if it does not define us. It is about knowing our roots, our heritage. What makes us, us. And only by looking back can we understand where our future may lie.
Tang culture is still celebrated in Kyoto, Japan. In an old textile shop, they have handmade fabrics going back over a century. Today, they have a new order. The 100-year-old loom seems to work ceaselessly, producing a famous traditional Japanese Nishi Jin cloth. Made from high-quality silk, Nishi Jin is used to make kimonos. The patterns ordered are very familiar to the senior master weavers in the shop. In Japan, it's called tongue flower. "1,300 years ago, during the Tang Dynasty in China, Japanese envoys took precious peonies from China back to their homeland. The flowers soon took root in Japan. Nowadays, the peony is spread all over Japan. It's as beloved as the cherry blossom. For 20-year-old Shizuka, this is a special moment. Today is her coming-of-age ceremony. Her mother has invited a kimono dressing instructor to help her daughter put on the specially ordered kimono. The procedure is long and complicated, consisting of more than a dozen steps. Many Japanese still believe that a belt made of nishi jin can protect their souls. In late April, just as the cherry blossom falls, the peonies come into full bloom. Today's peonies have large blooms and intricate layers of petals, both beautiful and elegant. In Japan, elegant and graceful women are described as peonies. These colorful flowers carry the best wishes of a mother to her daughter. The kimono is derived from Chinese clothing of the Tang Dynasty, a time when Japan imported much of its culture from the Asian mainland. The kimono is still quite commonly worn in Japan. But when did the peony become seen as more than just medicine? A Tang Dynasty record from the mid-8th century tells how a white tree peony attracted astonishment in the capital. People ceased to regard the peony simply as a medicinal herb. It had become something magical. This is Japan's peony town. Since the flower was introduced here during the Tang Dynasty, over 300 varieties have been created here. Professor Aoki is in his 60s. At 6 a.m., he begins his working day at Shimane University. He's been breeding new peony varieties for 40 years. He uses a colorimeter to determine colors, which can't be differentiated with the naked eye. Japanese culture admires pure colors. Aoki's greatest dream is to create a pure black peony. In nature, such a flower couldn't survive. The black petals would absorb damaging sunlight, which would destroy their cells. Today, peonies exist in 9 colors. Few people know that in fact red, pink, green, blue, black, and mixed color peonies are all the result of artificial breeding. In nature, peonies only have 3 colors: white, yellow, and purple. This is the world's largest peony gene database. China's top botanists are trying to find out the secret of the peony's colors by studying ancient species. Expert Zhou Shaliang finds that among all the 9 kinds of wild peonies, 3 have evolved into today's shapes. They share a common feature. They all have white flowers. Perhaps it was a spontaneous mutation in one of those white peonies that attracted such astonishment in the Tang Dynasty. From a single white species arose the colorful king of flowers. The Chinese name of the peony is mudan. The word dan means red. The Luoyang red peony is the only peony species that's named after Luoyang, one of the Tang Dynasty's capital cities. In those days, red was a color reserved for the upper classes and was a symbol of privilege. When the white peonies were first shown in the capital, they were greatly admired and highly valued. It's said that all women wanted them, and they were more costly than gold. But a few decades later, the red peony had become all the rage. It can't be found in nature. So where had this flashy newcomer sprung from? Lintao County has ideal climatic conditions for peony growing. The locals have been doing so here for over 1,000 years. It's late spring, and Kang Zhongying, a famous local peony expert, is keen to experiment on various peony species. His aim is to try to breed still new varieties. Distant hybridization is the most common way to experiment. The pollen of one species dusted on the pistils of another. In this way, the hybridized varieties will have a combination of different characteristics from the 2 donor species. We can imagine that during the Tang Dynasty, the 3 wild white peonies were randomly planted together, the exchange of pollen between them giving rise to the first red peony by chance. Thereafter, peony breeding became a labor of love and the opportunity to make your fortune if you bred an attractive new variety. In Kang Zhongying's garden, there are over 100 varieties. Some are unknown, even to the experts. The scene probably echoes that of the Imperial Garden in Luoyang 1,300 years ago. To breed a red peony requires that at least one of the peonies, which is going to be hybridized, has genes for the color red. The gene that caused the change of color has become the focus of Joe's study. It's the purple spot peony which has caught his attention. It can be found widely distributed throughout China, including the Loess Plateau, the East Qinling Mountains, and the Central Plains. The flower got its name from the purple patterns on the petals. Now almost 1,000 peony varieties have these purple patterns. These patterns might prove to be the key to Joe's study. Nature's secrets can be probed by modern technology in a detail once unimaginable. Joe finds a tiny amount of red pigment in the purple patterns. This is the peony's heaven-bestowed gift.
紫斑牡丹它的紫斑带有这种紫红色的这个色彩，当它杂交以后，这种紫斑它就会扩散到整个花瓣。这种情况已经得到很多杂交实验的证明。让紫斑牡丹与其他开白花的，比方说矮牡丹或者凤丹杂交以后，它得到的花的颜色是开红色的。
Gu County in Shanxi Province is close to the hometown of Empress Wu. But today, its most celebrated offspring is not the Empress of China, but the King of Flowers. During the flowering season, the Peony Festival attracts floral pilgrims from near and far. In fact, the King of Flowers owes its title to the Empress Wu. She was said to be so amazed by the peonies she saw in Shanxi Province that she ordered them brought to the Tang capital at Chang'an. With such imperial support, there was no stopping the flower as it stormed to the height of popularity in fashion and the arts. The petals are believed by many to possess magical powers to ward off misfortune. However, in nature, different species of peony will not cohabit. The birth of the Luoyang red can be attributed to the will of man as much as that of heaven. A peony fever took off. The rich and powerful would vie to impress one another with gifts of the plants from wherever they could be found. This meant that the gardens of the wealthy were turned in somewhat random fashion into peony propagators. Let us cast our imaginations back over the centuries to the glorious Tang Dynasty. It's late April. The ladies and gentlemen of the court are enjoying the verdant beauty of the spring. The peonies are putting on their finest display, and suddenly there amongst them, amidst the sea of fragrant whiteness, a red bloom has appeared. It's an omen from heaven. Red is the emblematic color of the Tang. From then on, the peony was not simply a medicinal herb or a decorative beauty. It was a marker of social and political status, a sign of heavenly approbation. "5 o'clock in the morning, a new day begins at a Japanese temple to the sound of the prayer bell. The ancient Imperial Temple of Hasadira is the oldest Buddhist temple in Japan. Its layout follows rules dating from the Tang era. The peonies here are also said to have dated from that time, Today, they are holding one of their most important annual ceremonies. The whole country is focused on the events in this small town of 20,000 people. The procession mounts the 399 steps of the ancient covered pathway. The climax of the ceremony arrives. Whether because of its aesthetic qualities or because of the mysteriousness of its life cycle, the peony takes the starring role. The finest specimen of the season is presented to the Buddha. This ceremony has been repeated annually for over 1,200 years. The ceremony concluded, the visitors from all over roam the gardens to enjoy the displays. The temple has 150 varieties of peony and nearly 7,000 individual plants. It's a peony lover's paradise. In another age, Empress Wu would have looked out over a similar scene and felt quiet satisfaction that her best-loved flower seemed destined for eternal glory. The Tang poets celebrated the peony in over 260 poems. The Luoyang red enjoys 40 on its own, while white and purple colors share in the rest. The poets of that classical age could scarcely have imagined the cavalcade of color yet to come. "200 kilometers away south of Luoyang lies Baiyun Mountain. With a 95% forestation rate, it's honored in China as nature's own museum. Each April, Li Xingor comes here to commune with the peony in his own special way. Deep in the mountain is China's largest high-altitude peony garden. Li believes that only here can the peony be seen in its true glory. Far from the overcrowded cities, the peonies sleep at night. Only their most ardent admirers will be privileged to see such a sight.
月光下是自然的看牡丹，牡丹那种自然现象啊，它在休息。人的最美的状态都是在休息蜜蜂的眼那种状态。它那个牡丹，当它这个夜里看牡丹的时候，它这个不看那么大，半合不合的时候，在月光下朦朦胧胧的感觉，那最美。
Li Xingor is a peony painter. Through close observation, he sees the details of the peony's life cycle and what this reveals about its character. Here Li depicts the final moments of a group of peonies. From brimming potential and ecstatic fluorescence to fading glory and fall, Li understands the peony as a simulacrum of all life. He has observed how when the plants are in crisis and under stress, they will produce one final bloom before they die in an effort to seed the future. Li's peony obsession, from its original wild status to the man-made varieties, has taken a philosophical bent.
到底牡丹啥样？我要看个真面目。是的，每年看，每年都有吸引我的那一张。这个牡丹，它跟人家不一样，跟旁边植物都不一样。它跟这个中国文化它还结合的比较紧，我从来没见过。
To this day, the peony continues to inspire and reward all who come close to it. When the peony was first mentioned in the 3rd century, Shan Nong's herbal classic, red peonies yet hadn't appeared. The Dan in its Chinese name, Mudan, may refer to its reddish roots. So from these roots in medicine, its beauty elevated it above all the others to become the king of flowers. The oldest variety in China is the Yangshan peony, found on the Yinping Mountain in Anhui Province. They remain true in form and substance to the classic wild peonies of ancient times. Both chance and destiny have played a role in shaping the place of the peony in Chinese culture. A beauty under heaven without compare, it stands among men, the sole exquisite fragrance of the air. Year on year, decade by decade, century after century, the reputation of this people's flower soars high in the skies.
This feeling inside, this feeling I can't deny. I want it, I'll chase it, I want it. Push my limits, I never quit. Keep dreaming, keep chasing, 'cause one day you're gonna shine. You're brave and choose them with pride. Trust that feeling inside. Stage, be ready for change. Keep going, just keep it going. Spread your wings, look up and see. It's time to run, it's time to fly, it's time to soar high above the clouds. Don't matter. camera. Every time I speak my voice, many challenges on, bro. Use my words, live my ammo. No matter where you're from, we got you. Sky is falling, we catch it. Snakes everywhere, read about it. I've been sending out cause we got it. I got this feeling inside. This feeling I can't deny. I want it, I'll chase it, I want it. Push my limits, I never quit. Keep dreaming, keep chasing. Cause one day you're gonna shine. You're brave and choose them with pride. Just that feeling inside. The world is your stage. Be ready for a change. Keep going, just keep it.